Welcome to the Order of Man podcast. You are listening to the Ask Me Anything. I'll be running solo today as Mr. Mickler is out hunting. In fact, he just posted on his Instagram, I believe just yesterday, he got a good looking buck. If you want to follow him on Instagram, you could do so at Ryan Mickler. That's the same handle he also uses for Twitter. Today, we'll be fielding questions, or I will be fielding questions, I should say, from the Foundry, from the Iron Council, and we'll be diving into those questions. And we got some good ones today, so stay tuned. Of course, as always, look out for the other episodes of the podcast. You have the Friday Field Notes with Mr. Mickler on Fridays, and then the interview show on Tuesdays. Okay, let's get into this. So Tyson Junkers, battle team leader actually for Endeavor in the IC, he has two questions. He says, when moving to a new town and city, where would you start looking for like-minded men besides the Iron Council? So Tyson, I would really think, what is it that we're looking for, right? Like-minded men. And I think we go to those areas where like-minded men are doing things. The first things that come to mind for me would be church. So based upon your religious affiliation, that would be critical. I think the other thing would be men's groups that are focused on doing hard things. I know that's, we don't know if we're exactly like-minded or not. But if they're doing difficult things, there's a really high probability that they're focused on improving themselves. And so anything from Brazilian jiu-jitsu to athletic clubs, business, entrepreneurial groups, anything around focus on improving themselves, whether it be through sports, hobbies, activities, or improving their mental well-being. Tyson's second question, I thought about starting up a local men's group. When I move, what would attract you to join one in your area? Would it be a message of the group, the type of events or frequency, etc.? That I could use this as an IC recruiting tool as well. So Ryan mentions this quite a bit, and I think it's pretty profound, is when it comes to creating social groups like this, consistency is key, mostly because you might do it once, Tyson, and then it's going to fall off the radar and you're going to lose momentum. And so I think people need to know that it's reoccurring, that it's reliable, that it's not just like this one-time, one-off scenario, and it's going to take some time to get some numbers. For me, the one thing that would attract me is the men that go, right? Now, that doesn't help you because I'd need to go first to see what kind of men are attending the group for me to like keep coming. But a few things, at least from my perspective, would be kind of around the message of the group. I do think activities are key, but it's really about, how's this? I wouldn't do a group meetup, or I wouldn't go to a group meetup if it was just a bunch of guys like, hey, let's just hang out. I would really want to be intentional with the time. Like, we're going to have a speaker or someone train on self-defense or firearm safety, or cover becoming more self-aware, or training on being open-minded, a fatherhood sessions, and an expert coming into town and, covering other subjects about, fatherhood in the home or whatever. Right. So intentionality, I think, is key. I think intentionality, and I think you have to have some momentum for it to be effective. And without that, I don't think you would have much success. Yeah, Tyson, hopefully that's beneficial. All right, Jonathan Moore, he says, at the main event, there was a question about how to serve your spouse without feeling like you are a servant. How do you harmonize this sentiment with a Christian man's calling by Jesus to be a servant leader? This calling is an underlining theme throughout the Bible, and is expounded upon by our Savior in the gospel and letters. However, it is almost a non-existent theme with regard to manhood today. I completely agree, Jonathan. This is the problem whenever people lose their mind and we say preside. or the patriarchy, because it must mean unrighteous dominion. It must mean, an ivory tower that people place themselves on. And I'm not saying that doesn't exist, but that's the misunderstanding of leadership. I have a good example of this. I'm trying to be more careful with what I share on the podcasts with work. It's okay. So I have a team member. We're talking about growing the team and having fire team leads on the team leaders that will take over certain team, be a direct manager for other team members. And the conversation came up of, would it be dealing with people being upset about it? And I think we run this in any scenario. So imagine we have a team of 10 peers. The minute you promote one individual as being a team lead, you run the risk of the others being offended, right? Like, oh, well, why did he get the position and not me, or whatever? And I do think that runs a risk for a small period of time until they learn through your example that you are there to serve them, that you are genuine in your effort to stand for them and assist them in their jobs and eliminate things that reduce their productivity and or eliminate things that are disruptions to them to be effective in their jobs, AKA serving them. I honestly do believe that once you have an opportunity to prove that your leadership is one of service, people are going to immediately go, yeah, he should be in that position. Him being in that position or her being in that position has helped me be better at what I do. And that just takes time. And so, Jonathan, I completely agree that this is a misunderstanding of leadership. And it's a misunderstanding of leadership because people do practice unrighteous dominion. We do know that that's the natural dispensation of almost all men, that whenever they get a little bit of power, they will practice unrighteous dominion. That's why it's important that, Jonathan, you and I and other men that know better stand up and lead correctly. And we lead from a place of service. Now, what's interesting about your question is how to serve your spouse without feeling like a servant. Well, I think that's probably an ego problem. And it's a little bit of pride, like, oh, well, I don't want to come across like a servant. No, right? Like, if your intentionality and you're genuine on assisting and serving your spouse, then do so and have the confidence. And maybe it's a little ego, maybe it's a lack of confidence of like feeling lesser of a person because you're serving your spouse or serving your children. Now, should you establish some boundaries? Is there important boundaries that you need to establish? Of course, do that. But I don't think you necessarily serving your spouse comes across as like you're any lesser of a man. If anything, it proves that you're a greater man. And we need to rise up and be the shining example of what leaders ultimately look like. Great question, Jonathan. Okay, Raul Allen G. For post-intense physical training, what methods have you found successful for recovery? Sleep, cold showers, ice bath, active stretching later in the day, and yoga. I know that's kind of a quick question, but those are the things that have assisted me. Hopefully that helps. All right. James Percival took the opportunity finally to jump into the Iron Council. What experiences can you share with overcoming pride? I find myself struggling with showing up in life because I feel I have to live up to the expectations of others. Example, I won't back down from a challenge regardless of the risk because I have been labeled as someone who won't back down from said challenge. Overcoming pride. I think, James, I would dissect what is pride for you. And this is kind of funny because is pride necessarily bad, right? And maybe it is slightly, But I don't think it's, I don't know. I don't necessarily think, hold on, I'm adjusting the mic a little bit. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think, but it can be. So let's think through that. Pride is probably, if we're going with the general definition, is maybe a little bit of narcissism, or thinking that you're potentially better than other individuals, or sometimes pride comes across as is kind of the cover up of low self-esteem. And we constantly are seeking the approval of others to cover that up. So a few thoughts back to your question, a few thoughts for overcoming pride. I'd say first, be self-aware, really evaluate, why are you doing what you do? You use the example of, you wouldn't back down from you wouldn't back down from a challenge regardless of the risk. Why? Like, why would you do that? Is it because you're seeking the approval of other individuals, or you just like a challenge? Is it an identity crisis? Be aware of why you're acting the way you're acting. Second, I think be aware of others and think through the human condition and what's motivating other individuals, and have some empathy and some thought process around what other people are doing. I would be open-minded and have a growth mindset. Consider the idea that you don't know everything, that there's an array of knowledge and information and expertise that you don't know about, and that's okay. And that's necessarily not a bad thing. Be willing to forgive yourself for your past mistakes. Realize you're a human, and that you're defined by your actions, and that you can move beyond your past actions. And then maybe a last couple thoughts is like, maybe don't try to take yourself so seriously. When I think about pride, I really think like the first thing that comes to mind is, the person that wants to try out a new hobby or learn something new, and they don't, because they don't want to come across like the noob, the individual that doesn't know what they're doing. And because of that, they never take action. And I think that's part of just taking yourself so seriously. Like, you're not going to be great at something, and it's okay to be the new guy, to be the greenie that is learning from scratch. And in fact, it's quite refreshing when you get that mindset to go, hey, I don't know nothing about this, and I'm open and completely able to absorb new information and coaching, because I've accepted the fact that I don't know this, and that's okay. So, and then maybe the last thing that comes to mind is maybe put your focus on something greater than yourself. I think sometimes pride creeps in when we're really focused about us and how we show up and what I'm doing, and comparing ourselves to other individuals. And by living a purpose-driven life and taking on something bigger than you, that allows you to focus your attention on something else and not yourself. I don't know. Hopefully those help. All right, Evan Berwick. Actually, Evan, I'm going to save your question for later. His question was, when starting your own brand or business, what is the biggest tuition payment you've made in the areas of social media? What did you take away from this experience that could be applied to life as a whole? Well, I'm going to answer the question, Evan, but I didn't want to answer it because you asked around social media. And my experience in creating a brand has been from a consulting perspective, and that's business to business. And I really didn't feel like there was a big enough play to justify trying to advertise through social media. And I've really taken the approach in my past that if I do amazing work, so much that a client is wowed, and I want to be like, I want to hang out with this for a second, not just do the job based upon clients' expectations, but do it in a way that they're wowed, that they're like, holy crap, that was amazing. That's way better than I exceeded my expectations. It got done quicker. We are way under budget. The services provided or the product is even more superior than what we requested, any way that I can wow a client. And I really feel that when we do that, business kind of just works out. Like that client talks to other clients, or that client eventually leaves that company and goes somewhere else and remembers you because you did such an amazing job. I think a good example of this is the amazing hole in the wall restaurant that a handful of people go to, and it is so amazing that everyone knows about it. And despite the location, despite the building, despite all these other, like maybe even their social media presence, despite all that, people will get in line to go because of the product, AKA in this case, and the service being provided is amazing. And I think when we do that, it kind of works itself out. Now, I'm probably going against some, startups' opinion about how to take advantage of social media or whatever else. So maybe, Evan, my advice is, sure, get advice. And we can maybe bring this up with Ryan around social media investments and advertising. But that's all smoke and mirrors if what you're doing isn't amazing. So get that right first. And I kind of really feel that everything else kind of works out its own way. And that's how that has worked out for me, at least. I've had success with just focusing on providing a superior product and service. All right. Next question. Luke Watts. I have a friend who is struggling in his marriage. I've tried being a lighthouse and offer him books, my own personal reflections, and plenty of time that I spend listening to him talk about his marriage. He does not seem to be making a change, and I'm a bit tired of his attitude that does not seem to take responsibility for the problems. He is seemingly always unjustly persecuted by his wife. Is there value on me more directly intervening, like trying to facilitate conversations between them, or is this just asking for trouble? I want good things for them, but after 12 months, they don't seem to be addressing things. Man, this is super tough. I mean, Luke, there might be an instance where you could ask them if there would be value in you facilitating a conversation and helping them. But not if they're not asking for help. A quote I love, and you'd think if I love it, I would be able to remember it. But like, before you help a sick man, ask him if he's willing to stop what is making him sick. And unfortunately, your friend and his spouse may not even be in the right mindset to like taking on any ownership whatsoever. And I think you're kind of seeing that in your conversations with him, right? You're probably giving some solid advice, and he's just constantly a victim. And despite what you say, he's not getting it. And I don't know, how's this? I haven't figured out how to get people to get it. They have to come to that realization on their own. And it doesn't seem like when you bring logic to the table that it's enough for them. And it really sucks, because you obviously care, right? This is obviously on your mind, and you want the best for them. And I'm sure, Luke, you're already being like a great example. And you're probably giving them some solid advice, and it's just not sticking. The only other thing that I didn't see in your question that I would maybe consider is maybe opening yourself up and sharing from a place that is a little more vulnerable. And so that way he can relate to what you're dealing with and potentially consider it for himself. One thing that I think is really powerful in our church, we have this distinction. We have every first Sunday of the month is fast and testimony meeting. And it's interesting because over the years, I have always how's this? I've never came to this conclusion of what makes a testimony powerful for one person versus the other. And over the last couple of years, I have finally gotten it. And the difference is that, and this is if it's done correctly, a good testimony is one that I don't preach to you, but where I share from a place of inspiration, where I share what has moved, touched, inspired me. And I constantly share from what I got out of something, like what has opened up for me, not and you need to, none of that, just for myself. And the power of that is people don't immediately push back. By default, whenever we preach sometimes, and by the way, I need to remember this because I get on a soapbox and I get all preachy. But when we preach, the natural human behavior is to determine if I agree or disagree. So Luke, if you start talking to me and going, oh, well, Kip, you need a I immediately go to, well, do I agree with him? Do I not agree with him? And I'm now debating and evaluating if you're right or if I'm wrong, or if you're right or if you're wrong. But when you share from a place of, hey, this occurred and I learned this, and man, it was this a major breakthrough in my life. And now I realize I'm showing up this way and it's really helped my marriage. I can't argue with that. Why? Because you're not saying it has anything to do with me. You're sharing what was present and available to you. And what's powerful about that is when you do that, people will naturally start considering it for themselves without any pressure of you saying they should. Are you already doing that? I don't know. But one thing to consider is maybe look for opportunities where, and maybe you don't need to share this, but maybe look for opportunities, Luke, in your marriage where you can reach out to this brother and say, hey man, do you have some time? I really wanted to share this breakthrough I had in my marriage, and share how you have been showing up a particular way and how it's been negative to your marriage. Talk about how you took on some ownership. You restored your integrity with your spouse, and it's so much better now. Maybe that will help. But in the end, when people are unwilling, there's not much we can do. I did read your quote, Luke, earlier, and a quote from James Allen entered my mind. And so I went out of my way and found it in preparation for this question. This is from James Allen's book, As a Man Thinketh. And by the way, back in the day, I believe in the Iron Council, this used to be a required reading when you first joined. This is by far probably my top 3 books of all time. I love this book. Anyhow, here's James Allen. A strong man cannot help a weaker unless the weaker is willing to be helped. And even when the weak man must become strong of himself, he must, by his own efforts, develop the strength which he admires in another. None but himself can alter his condition. Tim Beck, if you are able to share, what are the objectives and tactics on your current battle plan? And why are those specific ones on it? Do you share your battle plan with anyone inside or outside the Iron Council? Tim, I'll share my battle plan. So for those that aren't in the Iron Council, battle plans are our 12-week goals. We set these up on battle teams. You have teams that hold you accountable for the objectives and tactics that you've established. And then we rinse and repeat on a quarterly basis. I'm assuming Tim's asking because we just started a new fourth quarter of the year. And so I'll share those. As I pull that up really quick, I do share it. Tim, I don't always share it with my wife. If I'm smart, I would. But usually sometimes I'll share it with her. In the Iron Council, believe it or not, I don't. I'm not on a battle plan nowadays. And so I'm kind of running solo, but maybe I should be sharing this on Brocker on the leadership team. So then that way those guys can help holding me accountable. So, Tim, I'm taking that as advice from you, and I'll do that. So, all right, let me pull up my battle plan here. All right. So within the battle plan, we have 4 quadrants that we focus on. We focus on calibration. We focus on connection, our condition, and then our contribution. To learn more about the battle plan, or actually to sign up for a free 30-day battle ready, you can go to orderman.com/battle ready. And there's also a mobile app that we have called the Battle Plan app. You can search for that in Google Play or your Apple Store. And the URL, you know what, Chris is going to get mad at me if I don't give you guys the proper URL. And the URL to learn about the Battle Planner app is 12weekbattleplanner.com. All right, let me get back to my questions here. Sorry, I just wanted to get that URL correct. All right, calibration objective. By end of this quarter, to have a draft version of a book. It's going to be very draft, but to have a draft version of a book is my objective. The tactic that I plan to do on a daily basis is 30 minutes daily research and writing. Connection objective. I need to foster my family relationships better. The primary tactic for that quadrant is to be fully expressed daily. And then I have a secondary tactic of weekly date night. And fully expressed daily is not holding back. So if something is bothering me, if I'm upset, to ensure that I'm fully expressed each day. By the way, that will be a hard tactic for me and really important. Condition objective is to increase 10 pounds of muscle without decreasing my body fat. The tactic is keeping to a specific diet that I'm working on with daily workouts. Contribution objective is to be fully committed to Journey Team executive leadership where I work. And my primary tactic there is dedicated focus time, 30 to 60 minutes daily. There you go. Hopefully that helps, Tim. All right, Colton Briner. I'm a young father and supporting my wife on being our family homemaker. So I am the main source of income. Lately, things have gotten tight and has made me question if I'm being selfish, taking time for myself, development, for example, working out, reading, hobbies with other men, and etc. I have the opportunity to work longer hours on top of my 10 to 12-hour days, which would impede on my family/exercise time. I feel like adding hours would just result in redlining and destroying my other facets of life besides finances. Budget is being cut back as we speak, but any advice would be greatly appreciated. Thanks for all you do. It's a really good question, Colton. And it's a pitfall that I have fallen into in my life, where I've always thought, just work harder, just work harder. Things are difficult, just work harder. And what's great is that you're already aware that there's a cost. Everything that we do has an associated cost to it. And the question is, what is the cost, right? For instance, I could take on addressing homelessness in Salt Lake City, Utah. And that might be very taxing. What's the cost? Is the cost on my family time? Does the cost affect my children, my spouse, my own personal health, and my own personal well-being? Does it affect work, and et cetera? So the fact that you're aware that there's an associated cost to working more is like perfect, because I spent like 20 years just thinking that I was going to magically just work harder, and there's no actual cost to it. So props there. And I think you're already leaning in the right direction. I would not cut back. In the grand scheme of things, living a fulfilled life might be living one on a tight budget and having the flexibility and your personal time and maintaining good relationships with other individuals and feeling good physically about your body. Now, is there times and seasons? Sure. But I would really time box them. Like if you need to buckle down, you have an idea and you want to push through for a month or two, and you're willing to compromise those things for a few months just to uptick some income, sure. But I wouldn't make it the standard. And I think you're already kind of seeing the light. I think you're aware that like there's a cost to it. And I actually wouldn't pay that price. You're already working 10 to 12 hour days. Nah, or 10 to 12 hour days. Yeah. That's already a lot. So I would focus on not working harder. I would focus on working smarter. And I don't know what you do for your career, but there eventually is a point where you need to focus on passive income, that you need to figure out, how do I increase my financial income when it's not tied to the effort in which I put into it, right? Right now it is, that if you work 10 hours, you're going to get paid this. If you work 15, you get paid this, which means that if you want any increase in income, you have to put more time in. So I would focus, maybe have some intentionality around how do you generate some passive income in your current situation. So then that way it doesn't require more time from you to be able to do what you want to do. 10 to 12 is a lot, I think. And I wouldn't sacrifice how you're going to feel better about yourself, working out, or your time with your family, because I think those things are probably more important. So maybe focus on being a little bit more creative on how you're generating income instead. Okay. Cash Soliton, what are your top 3 pieces of advice for someone starting their own business? So I'll use my example. When I started my consulting company back in, I think it was 07, 08, if I remember correctly. The first thing is, and we say it a lot, so I sound like a broken record, minimal viable product. You don't even know if your business idea even has a market. And you think it might, but geographically, your price range, your unique selling proposition, you may not have a market for it. You don't know that. And until you actually have boots on the ground and you're actually like trying to sell something, you're not going to confirm that. And you may decide or find out that that MVP is not really what you want to do, or that service or that product is not really tied to what you want to accomplish. So take some action and focus on a minimal viable product. The best example I've heard of this is a minimal viable product for a service of getting from A to B is a skateboard. Upgraded version, a bike, and eventually a Ferrari. MVP is not a non-working Ferrari. An MVP is the skateboard. So focus on what your MVP is. And let me give you another example. I have a good friend that wanted to start I'll use me as an example. So I wanted to start a IT consulting firm. By default, what that looked like in my mind was, well, I got to hire like 20 consultants to start off with. We need office space. We need all these things, right, to be able to do it, which meant that I'd have to go get a business loan. I'd have to get funding or some capital of some sort. And I have to hire a bunch of people. I have to hire some sales reps. Like there's this big ordeal that was associated of what that looked like in my mind. The MVP for me was, I went to headhunters and said, here's my skill. This is what I can do. Find me a contract that is corp to corp, that they are willing to pay me a 1099 versus W-2. That way they're paying my company and not me as an individual. I required 0 sales reps. I required 0 offices, and I didn't hire anybody. At first, headhunters were doing it for me. And headhunters found me a contract. My first contract was actually for the Department of Defense. Landed that contract. Right after that, headhunters found me another contract. I only had to use those headhunters twice. for those 2 large contracts. After that, I got a reputation because I focus on high quality work so much that everyone was wowed and be more than willing to refer me to other companies. And that's what it took. And then once I had a good enough backlog of work, I didn't hire someone at first. I 1099 contractor. Then I hired someone part-time. Then I got someone full-time, and et cetera. And I rinsed and repeated until I was able to build a larger team. Man, I don't know if that's 3 pieces of advice or like 2 or 10. So MVP. Second, what is your unique selling proposition? And be very clear. Can you communicate it? And figure that out. So then that way, when you're focused on sales, you can articulate why a company would choose you versus someone else. That's your unique selling proposition. And third advice, I would recommend that you read E-Myth is a great book, maybe a couple books. E-Myth is a great book. Story Brand, consider reading that book. I love the idea of Story Brand because it focuses, so many of us companies, we think we're the hero. Like we go into our marketing like, hire us, we're the hero and we'll help you. But how much more powerful is it when you're the sidekick and the client's the hero and your focus is on making them the hero? You're the Obi-Wan Kenobi. And that's a really powerful way of thinking. And it puts the customer first in regards to what their business objectives are and even their individual requirements are and what they're looking for individually. So much, at least in the professional services area, so much of what we do is on the back of someone's reputation, whether it's an executive that decided to bring us in or it's our peers within the company that we're working with. It's really important that we consider how our work affects them and the company as a whole. Successful projects, one, obviously meet business requirements, but also addresses the need of the individuals within the company and supports them in their overall objectives. Serving those stakeholders is critical. MVP, unique selling proposition, and I'd focus on E-Myth and Story Brand for the marketing side of things. George Sykes, what is the single most important issue at this moment in time and why? Way to go deep there, George. It'd be really flashy to say the most important issues are political, right? But they're not. I don't think they're not. I think the most important issue in the very moment in time is how we show up in our homes and workplaces. You, George, me, Cash, the other men in the Iron Council, everyone listening to the podcast. I think that is the most important issue at hand, is how we show up, because that is the ripple effect of how that affects our societies, our neighborhoods, our families, the next generation, and more. I really honestly believe that is the most important issue. And like Jordan Peterson would kind of illustrate, far too often we get wrapped up in all these things outside of our control and we get pissed off, but yet our own homes are broken or we're broken, and how we're showing up in our homes is in a negative way, that we're affecting our children in negative ways, and et cetera. So most important issue is us, you, George, me. That's my important issue. Most important issue. Rodney Collard from Battle Team Endeavor, those guys. All right. What does the Order of Man War Eagle represent to you? So Rodney's referencing the War Eagle t-shirt. You guys can actually find that t-shirt in the Order of Man store. Go to store.orderofman.com. It's a pretty awesome shirt. It's the War Eagle, and well, I'm not going to try to explain it because it was explained to me. I'm going to slaughter it, but nonetheless, depending on what direction the eagle's head is facing determines if you're at war or not. And Rodney, for me, I think it goes back to George Sykes' question, was like, what's the most important issue? And to me, that is the war with myself, the war against my natural tendencies, against the human man, which results in my patience with my children, the affection and love I show them, how I treat my wife, how I show up here in the office at work. Man, I don't know, it sounds corny, but like, I think our impact in the world is so huge. And Rodney, I think the super version of Rodney, like the super Rodney, is like, your potential is amazing. And so much is made possible if you were that version of yourself. And so I think that is what we should all be focusing on. And to do that, I think it's a war with ourselves. A quote comes to mind I read this morning on Instagram, and I tagged it. Hold on. It's by Aristotle. He says, I count him braver who overcomes his desires than him who conquers his enemies. For the hardest victory is the victory over self. And that's, I think, where we have the greatest impact, is our victory over self. Hopefully that helps, Rodney. Good dialogue. All right, Jake Thompson. This question is for both you, really, but do either of your misses train Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? And what are your thoughts on advocating for our wives to train? In my opinion, it's something every woman and man really should learn for many reasons, but would love to hear your thoughts. Totally agree. Everyone should do it. No. So to answer your question, no, my wife doesn't train. And it's been interesting. If I had to guess, there's been an evolution of jiu-jitsu in our family, where it was kind of like this weird hobby that dad, or, my husband has. And that's what it was. And then over a period of time, I think the perspective of jiu-jitsu to my wife has changed, and she gets that it's not a hobby, that it's not this negotiable thing that I just will do once in a while, that it's very much part of me as an individual. So much that when, like, for instance, someone asked me, those that don't train would only ask this question, but ask me like, oh, what's next? Like, how long do you think you'll train for? And that's a really silly question. It seems silly for guys that are practitioners in jiu-jitsu, because the answer to that is, when I die, I will train forever. There's no reason I would stop training. It's part of me, right? It's part of our family. My kids know jiu-jitsu, whether they've been training jiu-jitsu or not, they know it, because it's part of the fiber of what we talk about, and it's how we wrestle. And my 2-year-old thinks he knows jiu-jitsu. Whenever we wrestle, he talks about it. And so it's very much part of our family. Now, my wife hasn't trained, but she has given interest every so often. She'll be like, "Oh, I want to," but I think it's like most things. It's a hard thing to get into. It's very difficult. It's confronting. It's uncomfortable. There's a lot, I think, that blocks people from doing jiu-jitsu, for sure. And my wife would be one of them. Now, with that said, some ideas. I think the key things is, especially for women, is having other women to train with. If there was 0 women at our school and I was trying to get her to come in and train, the probability is next to 0. However, when we do have the conversation about her meeting up with other girls at Unified and going to class, when they go to class or going to a woman's seminar, all of a sudden, that interest spikes up quite a bit. And that increases the chances of it. Now, with that all said, it's kind of like all the other questions, a few of the questions earlier today. It's like, I can't force her though. I mean, I can logically give her the ideas and the benefits of it, but it's something that she needs to do. And there's even been a time where she's like, fine, I'll do jiu-jitsu. And I actually told her, I'm like, no, don't do jiu-jitsu. And she's like, why? I'm like, do it if you want to. Don't do it because I'm harassing you to. And really think about those two different scenarios. I mean, we even talk about this at work. There's a big difference in me doing something because the owner asked me to do it versus me being bought in and wanting to do it. We show up differently. We really do. If she's going to go do jiu-jitsu, but it's only to appease me, that's not the right way to go into it, right? And so I'm okay with her not training. I would like her to, but I'm okay with her not training. And if and when that works for her, then I'll be excited. And if it never does, that's okay too, because her growth and what works for her is different than me. And I honor our differences and honor our different interests, right? And so I'll support her in those areas, whether I quote unquote see the same value in them or not. Ryan talks about, how his wife, loves beekeeping, and, he usually helps her and has promoted that as her self-development, where, his is focused on other things. So, all right, Jake, hopefully that helps. Probably not the answer you wanted to hear though. You're like, man, how do we force them? But we don't, right? So that's, I think that's the focus. All right, let's hop down to a couple other questions and then we'll probably wrap up here momentarily. What's your number one, I'm sorry, Billy Hukill? What's your number one lesson to teach your boys? I have a 2-year-old and an infant. And when do I start instilling masculinity into my boys? So first off, they're probably bubbles of masculinity already, right? They're like crazy. And in fact, research this. I wish I could remember. I believe the amount of testosterone, like I think around 2, starts skyrocketing in little boys. So Billy, your boy probably has more testosterone than you have. and then I think it skyrockets when they're young, and then it skyrockets again during like their teenage years, if I remember correctly. Anyhow, don't take my word for it. But regardless, I think it's very natural. So I don't think it's too much of a instilling right into them. However, I think there are some things that we should probably be teaching our boys, of course. And I would even say that 2-year-old is not too young to start thinking of those things. So I have a 2-year-old. He's going to be 3 later this month. So let me think through this. What's the number one lesson I should be teaching him? I think for me around that age is controlling his emotions. And I want to reiterate this because I don't want this to be misunderstood. And in fact, I had the same conversation with my 8-year-old daughter, literally like last night. It's okay to be upset. I was telling her like, Kulani, control your emotions. Oh, but I feel so upset. I'm like, it's okay to be upset. That's okay. But you need to control your reaction to it. So if you're upset, awesome. That's fine. Now, how do you talk though? Right? How do you communicate your frustration without screaming and yelling or whatever? Same thing with the kid. That's exactly what we're doing when he starts screaming because he wants his bottle or he wants something that he can't get. It's like, calm down, use your words, say please. Part of that is controlling your emotional state and the action or your reaction to the emotional state. And so I think that at that age, I think that's probably the most critical thing. The other, I think that would be really early on. I think 2 might be a little too difficult, maybe in about a year or so, is that we do hard things. And make that a standard in your family that Hugh Kills, if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, or Sorensens, do hard things. And that it's through doing hard things that we grow. The other thing that comes to mind is that we are not defined by our circumstances, but how we show up in spite of them. This is a lesson that comes to mind because my oldest son, has Usher syndrome. His circumstances are tough. And so this has been very present in my life of this idea of like, hey, Brendan, you're not held back by your circumstances. Who you are is what decisions you make in spite of them. And some of our circumstances are tough. And that's okay. It's what we deal with, what we do with them is what matters. So controlling your emotions and your reaction to your emotions, your circumstances not defining you, and then doing hard things. And that is how you grow. Oh, and I would add one other thing, Billy, because this comes up a lot with my younger kids, is there's this built-in, it's really interesting. It's like this built-in idea that whenever someone's good at something, that they're good at it because of some magical gift or talent. And don't get me wrong, I understand that in a few circumstances that's actually true. But I think in most circumstances, it's reps. It's all about reps. And I've tried to remind my younger kids of that on a regular basis. Whenever they're like, oh, she's so good at, I don't know, her back tuck or whatever. It's like, oh, it's because she probably has put in more reps than you. She's practiced more than you. That's the difference. Oh man, that guy, I wish I was better at football. Awesome. Guess what you need to do? More reps. More reps. That's how you become better. You got to practice more. Okay. Joseph Ryan, how do you maintain order and cleanliness in your home? What are you responsible for keeping clean and orderly? How do you teach this to your children? Oh man, I should probably skip this question. Man, how's this? I'm the guy in our family where if my wife's like, hey, let's go to Disneyland on a vacation. Do you want to go to Disneyland on vacation with the kids for 3 days, or would you rather stay home and clean? I would say I'd rather stay home and clean. I'm that guy. So Joseph, I take this to a fault where I will bypass experiences and enjoyment of life for the sake of having an orderly and clean home. How do you maintain it? I mean, in my opinion, you put stuff away. Everything has a place. So if you move something or you use something, it goes back to where that place is. If something doesn't have a place, a place needs to be made for it. Period. That's my answer. And the only things that I try to teach my kids is like, never touch things twice. Highly ineffective. If you grab something, don't carry it halfway through the house, drop it off, make a pile so you can go back to the pile and move it again. That's highly ineffective. Don't touch things twice. So everything has a place. Don't touch things twice. And I think it's like everything else in life. It's like, we could do a Hail Mary workout and try to get swole before the end of the year. We all know that's not going to work. What works is repetition and consistency over a longer period of time. I think it's the same thing for kids maintaining a clean home and for maintaining a clean house. Keep it clean every day. Every day, put away the things that need to be put away. Do your laundry on a regular basis. Pick up after yourself. Do the dishes right after dinner. Do it in the moment. When we do that, we don't have to spend a Saturday cleaning a house all day. One thought, Joseph, that comes to mind, and I know this is not necessarily a question, but as you're like teaching your children to try to keep a clean home, remember that you're trying to teach them the importance of being clean and orderly. and that you're not trying to just get their room clean, because there's a big difference, right? You might yell, scream, and kick and be angry and rude to your kids, and the room might get clean, but what did you teach them? So I would focus on, how do you get buy-in? How do you get them to be self-directed, to have self-discipline versus imposed discipline? You can impose discipline, but what happens when you go out of town? They're not going to do it. So I would focus on, how do we create self-discipline where the kids are bought in and committed to the idea of having a clean room. That could be rewards. That could be a logical conversation explaining the importance of having a clean room and why you want them. Try to get them on board in the thought process, but maybe it might just be a reward system of, hey, guys, you need to maintain a clean room. Here's the importance why. This is critical. And this is what's going to be made available to you guys in the event that your room's clean. And, or here's what's going to be taken away from you if your room's not clean. Set that expectation, follow through, and don't get angry. Implement the boundaries and the consequences, whether positive or negative, but don't get angry about it. Just act upon it. That way you're not attacking their identities or, getting angry at them and they don't feel hurt, but they're also feeling the results of not following those potential rules. All right. Hopefully that helps. All right. We're going to call it. I have to call it quits. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. So, we talked about a handful of things. We filled questions from the Iron Council. Next week, or stay tuned actually for Friday field notes for this coming Friday, to connect with Ryan on Twitter and Instagram. You can connect with him at Ryan Mickler. And of course, you can get swag at store.orderofman.com and just support the movement. If I had to put an emphasis on, or paraphrase kind of what I got out of the conversation today, this one-sided conversation, is the importance of how we show up, and that being the biggest and the most important battle that we should all be focused on. And so whether that's you joining another group or spreading the message of the Iron Council and the Order of Man, so be it. But get on the court, be an active participant, be the man in the arena of your life and of the lives of others, and create that lasting impact that is so very much needed in the world. Connect with Ryan and I. Give us feedback. Let us know how things are going. Once again, you connect with Ryan at Ryan Mickler, and you can connect with me at Kip Sorensen on Instagram. Thanks. And until Friday field notes, take action and become the man you were meant to be.